I see Isaiah, it's time to get rolling. Okay, everybody, my name's Jill Stewart. I'll be moderating today's teleconference. It's a look at the effort by city officials in the city of Sacramento to end single-family zoning. They might end up being this first city in the state to do it, although one or two other cities are discussing it. And we have three very interesting panelists this morning to talk about what's going on in Sacramento. I'm going to give you a very brief biography of each of them, and then we'll hear from Maggie Coulter, Kirk Viverberg, and please, Kirk, tell me if I've got that wrong on your last name, and Chris Jones, way easier to pronounce. Maggie's going to be speaking first. Each of them is going to talk for about 10 minutes, and then they're going to have a give and take and discuss out the issues. They don't necessarily agree on everything, and that's more than welcome here at this meeting. So Maggie Coulter is with Save Sacramento Neighborhoods. She's president of the Elmhurst Neighborhood Association. She's worked as a land use planner and in affordable housing for the California Department of Housing and Community Development. She's a longtime Sacramento resident and also an activist in the areas of peace, justice, and environmentalism. Chris Jones, who will be joining us today, is a resident of the Colonial Heights neighborhood in Sacramento. He participates in community organizations, including their neighborhood association and Hope for Sacramento, which is a homeless advocacy group. He has a BS in tech, and he works at a healthcare entity. Kirk Viverberg is at the Land Park Community Association, which is a very well-known group in Sacramento, widely respected. He's a board member. He's an expert within that group on land use, and I believe the group has been involved in saving some open space, but I couldn't find the story about it. I was trying to look up. So welcome to all three of you. Rick is going to unmute all three of you, but Maggie will be speaking first for about 10 minutes about her views on what's going on, and then we'll go to Chris, and then we'll go to Kirk, who I think has some slides he wants to show us. So Maggie, I saw you earlier. I can't, right now I'm not seeing your square, but I know you're out there somewhere. Rick, is Maggie unmuted?
I think I'm unmuted now.
There you are. Hi, Maggie.
Okay, great. Thank you for hosting this. So I'm the president of the Elmhurst Neighborhood Association, and a couple of years ago, we fought a spot zoning in our neighborhood, and we started at that time an effort called No to Rezone, which has been reactivated now in Sacramento as Save Sacramento Neighborhoods to help organize around this effort to try to stop this elimination of single-family zoning. So basically, the city is saying that they want to create allow for different types of housing, duplexes, triplexes, fourplexes, in single-family neighborhoods. Basically, that means that you no longer have single-family zoning. I have to point out in California, actually, we no longer have single-family zoning anyway, but it is capped right now at 3 units because statewide, the state law allows by right 2 accessory dwelling units. Now, granted, those are smaller units than you might get if you built an apartment, but they're also fairly good size. So what that means when a city, if Sacramento is successful in eliminating single family zoning and rezoning the R1, which is our single family district, if they're successful in doing that, what that means actually is that people could build 6-unit apartments on single family lots. And there are a number of quite small lots, especially in the older neighborhoods. My neighborhood, the average lot size is probably 5,000 square feet. But this is technically doable within the setback limits because the accessory dwelling unit lets you override the lot coverage requirements. Coupled with this, the city is also wanting to eliminate all on-street parking requirements, whether it's residential, commercial, office, whatever it is, so that no developers would be required to provide on-site parking. And in a neighborhood like ours, where we do have, it's a smaller neighborhood, narrower streets, houses. There's some houses here from the 1800s. Most of them were built in the 20s, 30s, 40s. Putting a lot more cars on the street, of course, is going to just increase congestion. That's one of the many problems with this proposal. But basically, it is a effort on the part of the city really to significantly increase the density of existing neighborhoods, to really densify the city limits, and maybe more of an emphasis on the core, because some of these older neighborhoods are closer to the center. So what we learned last night, we had a webinar with a planning consultant who had thoroughly read the housing element, which is coming before the city council for authorization this Tuesday, is that the city is not looking to any of the R1s to meet its RHNA numbers from the housing element. So basically, it doesn't need to upzone and densify existing neighborhoods in order to meet its RHNA numbers, which kind of raises the question about why is the city doing this? And one of the things that the planner, the consultant pointed out was that there really is a lack of protection for existing neighborhoods, and recognizing the importance of having stable neighborhoods and maintaining the fabric and the diversity of neighborhoods. Well, that's kind of sort of all thrown out the window with the cities wanting to eliminate single family zoning and essentially turn all single family neighborhoods, and I would say predominantly single family neighborhoods, into multifamily for up to 6 units, as I mentioned. And again, I do want to emphasize it's really important, and the city seems to be ignoring this, is that you already can have turn your single family home into a triplex if you wanted to, because of the ADU ordinance. Now, whether people would do that, and that again, there's size limits and that kind of thing, is another question. One of the things the city says is, well, this isn't going to disrupt neighborhoods because of design standards. And what they mean by design standards, there are no architectural design standards in Sacramento's design review ordinance at this time. What they mean is that units would meet the setback and lot coverage requirements, and then there's a height limit. But under the height limit, you could actually have a 3-story building. The problem with that is coupled with this, the city has been eliminating public input. And so more and more decisions are being made administratively, including what the city calls deviances. Back in my planning days, we called them variances, but basically when you're not using you're getting something less than the setback. And so some of these decisions are being made administratively, and neighbors aren't necessarily informed. And if there is going to be a challenge to something like that, it's going to be quite costly for neighbors to appeal a decision like that. So you have kind of the city moving to try to eliminate the I'll just call them moderate density neighborhoods, and also to cut out public opinion. So why is the city doing this? And what the city is saying, and I wish I had the housing element. I don't know if I can find it here. They're doing it under the guise, allegedly, of affordable housing, and which it's not going to create affordable housing. They're also saying that it will right the wrongs of past discrimination. Another thing that it's not going to do. So basically, the city is saying, says demographic patterns across the region as well as in the city reflect the consequences of racial and ethnic segregation. Part of why some neighborhoods remain predominantly white in their racial composition is because the, quote, desirable neighborhoods remain zoned exclusively for single family homes. The exclusion of this now prevents lower income families from moving to these neighborhoods. Well, it's in a way that's blatantly false. We know that housing discrimination was eliminated in the 1960s. Redlining was made illegal. There definitely are neighborhoods in Sacramento that had CC&Rs that discriminated on the basis of race. That is all illegal now. What is the salient issue here, of course, is economics. there are more expensive neighborhoods in Sacramento and there are less expensive neighborhoods. Although with so many people moving up from the Bay Area, I think all the neighborhoods are going to become more expensive. But the city is using this, and it's I actually find it offensive because from a number of reasons. One of the reasons is supposedly there's only so many desirable neighborhoods in Sacramento. So, and the presumption that I guess either that everybody could live in those neighborhoods, or somehow if we let people rent in those neighborhoods, that's going to undo, discrimination and segregation, which it's not going to do. So it really is, it's gratuitous what the city is saying. The truth is that all neighborhoods should have the same services, should have good schools, safe streets, and all that. That is important. The city needs to invest in that. To say that there is a desirable neighborhood it really means that other neighborhoods are undesirable, and the city needs to address why is that true. The other thing is there are lots of single family neighborhoods in Sacramento, and they're all diverse. So there are neighborhoods where it's true, some that are more predominantly white, which again is more at today's world related to economics. There are some neighborhoods where they're single family neighborhoods where they're more people of color. There are neighborhoods like mine, which are integrated. So the city is kind of using this, and I think the buzzword of today is equity. And I think Chris Jones will get into this too about why this isn't really true, what the city is saying. How much time do I have left?
2 more minutes.
Okay. So one of the things that we're trying to do here in Sacramento is really wake people up about this. The city has not been very forthcoming. They did a survey with loaded questions like, well, I mean, essentially, I'm paraphrasing, but this is the inference, if you're not a racist, then of course you support getting rid of single family zoning. And if you oppose it, then you're a racist. And it's these leading questions, I think, again, they're offensive, but they also kind of sidetrack the city from really needing to face issues for people in Sacramento in terms of housing, like affordability. And the city it got rid of its inclusionary zoning ordinance. It is not requiring new development to have a certain percentage of affordable housing, or it's very small. So the city, by saying, well, this somehow is going to fix affordable housing, I just want to say it's a lie, because they're not relying on the R1 for the housing element. They're not saying that any affordable housing is going to go into the R1 zones in the housing element. They have no provisions for assuring that the housing is affordable. And the truth is, what's happening is that rents are here, and people have probably read about this, rents here are very high and they're going up. And this is anecdotal, but 2 doors down from me is a duplex, which rented for $1,300 a couple of years ago, flipped a couple of times. Now rents I think it rents for $2,700 now. A couple from the Silicon Valley just moved in. So the fact that rental unit, that was of no benefit to existing Sacramento residents. There definitely are Sacramento residents, lower and moderate income residents, who need housing, who also need the opportunity to buy and own their own homes, which this is not going to do that either, because it's going to eliminate housing stock. Sacramento does have a significant homeless problem. This isn't going to do anything about that. So really, it's kind of an attack really on these lower density neighborhoods. I also want to mention 2 more things before my time runs out. The environmental impacts of this haven't been assessed. As was brought up in our call yesterday, we have a combined sewer system that is very old and also overloaded. And so if you take and increase the density in some of these neighborhoods, and you could go from a single family unit to a 6-unit apartment, that's a 6-fold increase in density. Whether that sewer system can take that or not, I don't think it hasn't been assessed at any rate. The other thing is California's going into a drought, and I don't know that there's been any kind of assessment about water usage. If we're going to, increase our population, continue to increase the number of housing units in California, how that's going to be supported by the water that we increasingly don't have. So that's another issue. Neither one of those issues have been addressed by the city. And the city continues to make these claims that, you know, you're going to all of a sudden get all this affordable housing if you eliminate single family zoning. You're going to right the wrongs of past discrimination, and none of that is going to occur. In fact, the opposite. And I think I'll just end with, I think, you know, we're moving into, Sacramento is building more multifamily housing. I think what's happening is there are more rental opportunities. I'm not disputing that, but I think for lower and moderate income households, my guess is probably most of the people on this call own their own home. There's a lot of financial security in that long-term, when people get older. And if that opportunity doesn't continue to be provided to people, that's a long-term problem. And it's not going to be healthy, I don't think, for our society or economies in the long run. So I don't know if that's my 10 minutes, but.
Thank you, Maggie. That was fantastic. I've introduced everybody, but just really briefly, we'll be hearing now from Chris Jones. He's a resident of Colonial Heights. He participates in their neighborhood association, as well as Hope for Sacramento, a homelessness advocacy group. Chris Jones, welcome to the morning.
Am I off mute? Have I managed this?
Yeah, we can hear you.
All right, great. Good morning, everyone. So some of my talking points are going to repeat some of the things that Maggie said, but I think they're really important, so I'm going to go over them anyway. But ultimately, the city of Sacramento, in our case, and a lot of people at the state level, are leaning heavily on three major points to justify increasing the density. The first point is racial equity. They mentioned, racial equity. They mentioned that due to the historic impacts of redlining and past discrimination, that neighborhoods of color even now are lagging behind, and whiter, more restricted neighborhoods have been unfairly advantaged and continue to be so today. The second argument is economic diversity, in the sense that some neighborhoods have exclusively well-off people, and that those neighborhoods are disproportionately in receiving of amenities and services from their local municipalities. And then the third argument is that demographic changes are leading to changing preferences amongst people, in the sense that household size are shrinking. They say about 63% or so of households have either one or two people. But the thing is, ultimately, all of those fall pretty flat when you take the time and do a little bit of the research. And increasing density doesn't necessarily address any of those issues. As far as what the real consequences are when you increase the density, when it comes to racial equity and diversity of neighborhoods, there was a study at New York University regarding the racial makeup of upzoned parcels. The city undertook a large, essentially an experiment between 2000 and 2007, where they upzoned large sections of the cities in accordance with their transit-oriented development plans. And while the supposition would be that you would see more minority people move into those neighborhoods, the upzoned parcels were actually statistically associated with a 5 to 9% increase in white populations. So like I said, it's not a problem that white people want to live there, but when your stated goal is to increase the racial and ethnic diversity of a neighborhood, well, that's typically the opposite of what you're trying to accomplish there. As far as affordability and economic diversity, there really isn't any evidence to prove that large-scale upzonings will make housing more affordable either. There is a study by Yona Freemark from MIT about upzoning in Chicago. They also kind of undertook a large-scale natural experiment where they upzoned large portions of the city, and the study found two things. One, that there was precisely zero net new housing created. So they didn't even really get the increased density that they were planning to have. And then second, the transaction prices for real estate sales in those zones actually increased. The study speculated that The reason for that was because multifamily zone land is more expensive than single family zone land. Even if you don't make any improvements to the structure itself, the price of the land underneath increases, which then reduces the affordability. And then the third point for the city that falls flat is that demographic change is leading to changing preferences. Well, that's not true either. Redfin, the real estate site that I'm sure all of you have seen, they did a study in 2019 and they found that 89% of the surveyed people decided that they would prefer a single family home over a suite in a triplex or a duplex or a fourplex, even if it meant they had to drive longer to get to work. And out of those surveyed, well, actually, these weren't even surveyed people. It was people in their data from their search engine directly. 33% of home buyers search exclusively for single family homes. They don't even look at duplexes or triplexes or anything like that. So the thing is, the idea that the city planners and state level planners are able to decide on their own that, oh yeah, increased density is what people want and what they should be doing, doesn't really work. It doesn't jive with what people are actually doing and consumer preferences. So those three issues are just big holes in the argument for increasing density. As far as what is likely to really happen, as far as if we increase density, um, we are likely to see in the scapegoated neighborhoods, there will be little to no change. In Sacramento, the politicians have scapegoated areas like Land Park, Curtis Park, and East Sacramento as fairly wealthy, well-off, primarily white areas of the city, and they make the mention that, oh well, we hope to see more economic and racial diversity in those neighborhoods by increasing the density. What's likely going to happen is that we will see in neighborhoods that are historically neighborhoods of color, especially ones that are seeing increased development now. For example, in Sacramento, we have an area called Oak Park, and UC Davis is building an innovation and technology campus called Aggie Square there, which we expect to see in the next couple of years. Well, what I expect to see at that point would be developers and investors purchasing cheaper homes in that area and redeveloping them into triplexes and fourplexes at market rate or market premium rate, since they're new developments. Beyond that, when new housing is built in an area at a premium rate, what you can expect to see also is the nearby housing increase in price. Because if I build a new house and I can charge $2,000 a month in rent, well, the guy next door with an older house who may be charging 1,000, he's going to up his price to maybe 1,800 because he says, okay, well, I just need to be cheaper than the brand new house. So those are the kind of things that we can expect to see. We can expect to see the racial diversity targets of the city be failed miserably because they can't really control who purchases and doesn't purchase in a particular area. That's a function of price typically. So what I would expect to see, using the Oak Park example again, is primarily well-paid new employees of UC Davis and the associated tenants of the innovation campus come to move there at premium rates, displacing the existing residents who have to go somewhere to make room for the new residents. Ultimately, what we're going to see likely is large-scale gentrification in low-income neighborhoods that are going to see increased development around this, and then urban flight as people who can afford to leave when certain quality of life metrics that they don't appreciate, like off-street parking, I mean, and noise and so on and so forth, they're not finding the quality of life that they're looking for. They're going to move. And those will be our higher and above moderate income folks. And it'll only be low income people left. And as we know in other cities such as Baltimore and Detroit, that is not a recipe for a healthy community. It takes a spectrum along the income scale to make a healthy community. And by essentially chopping off the top rungs of the ladder, like, it really just drags everyone down. So ultimately, like, I guess in conclusion, because I think I'm coming to the end of my time here, The city is leaning very heavily on some metrics and arguments that don't necessarily hold water when you take a serious look at the data and the metrics surrounding that and what's happened in other places. And the idea that increasing density by itself would increase either racial or economic diversity is misleading at best and outright fraudulent at worst. Thank you.
Chris, one wrap-up question that I had for you.
Sure.
Is it the entire city council, or was it a split issue, or are they all together in believing these things?
As it stands now, it seems that the city council is fairly united in wanting to move forward with this increase in density.
So they're not worried about voters. They don't think they're going to get a voter backlash.
They're arguing. I've asked a few of the city council members. My councilman, he said, "I believe it's the right thing to do, so we should do it." So I think that they're using the moral argument and the equity argument to essentially act as a smokescreen for ideological beliefs that they think are going to produce these outcomes that they've ideologically come to, but they don't really have the data to support it. And there hasn't really been any real evidence asked for or given in their arguments here.
I just want to add in that I think I'm not sure what their motivations are. I mean, Chris is correct what they're saying, whether there's also motivations because they want more developer fees. I mean, if you raise property values, you get higher taxes. I mean, that's an argument. I think that the city council meeting where this was approved, there were a couple people that didn't say anything. And clearly the mayor is a big engine in Sacramento, and he's got our council person, I would say, pretty much in his pocket, and some others, and they all did vote for it. I think that doesn't mean to me, hopefully, that if there is more of an outcry and objection that you may see some changes. I don't know, maybe I'm being more optimistic about that, but yes, so far Chris is right, they have a united front. I think they also kind of got this in under COVID. There were no people at the city council meeting, right? They're meeting virtually. I mean, you can make comments, but it's very difficult to do. You have to be you have to wait on the phone a long time, and people get cut off, and then they don't let you make your comments. So it's not an ideal situation, and I think they've taken advantage of that. And again, I do think the way that they sort of marketed this, that they kind of quelled, right? People weren't really alerted to it. I remember meeting with our council person during the process of developing this, and he assured us that our neighborhood was going to be protected. Well, it was simply not true, but right, we listened to that instead of getting more active sooner, which we should, although my neighborhood association took a position in December, but still this process has been going on. So anyway, I just wanted to throw that in too.
Thank you, Maggie. Next will be Kirk Viverberg, and Kirk is with the Land Park Community Association on the board, and he's an expert on that board on land use. Welcome to Kirk.
Thank you very much. I'm going to share my screen here. While I'm sharing this, can you see this photograph all right?
Yes.
Okay, great. While I'm sharing this, I wanted to pipe in on that last question, transitional question on the city motivations. Politically, the politicians can't lose in this argument. We're all members of neighborhood associations. We all know what it's like to have the city tell us they just can't give us what we want. They don't have the money, they don't have the manpower, they don't have the policies in place, they don't have the time, or they have restrictions that they're under by the state. Those are never satisfactory to us, and we all know what that feels like. What the city is going to do here is they're going to get the neighborhoods to stop this upzoning. They're going to get the neighborhoods to tell the communities of color and the communities of lesser economic means, that they can't live in what are considered amenity-rich neighborhoods because of a variety of reasons. We will give them the reasons why. And I do believe that this R1 upzoning will fail because there are too many good reasons why it is not legitimate. But it will be the neighborhoods that will prove that. And the politicians will have fought the good fight on behalf of equity. So they really can't lose. They're getting us to do their work for them. Now, I'd like to go and talk to you about community alternatives. Land Park Community Association and the greater Land Park community, which is, Land Park is a well-off small neighborhood. But its greater neighborhood is made up of working class neighborhoods. 50% of the capital A affordable housing is within our greater community. So we're quite diverse. And we've been working for a year with the city to establish the basis of both principles and directions for the general plan. We started this a year ago with an 8-page document done by a work group of 50 people in the greater community, made up of 6 different neighborhood associations, of our visions and issues. One of the visions was that we allow for more diversity in housing types in our community. And the reason for that is our community is highly livable and it's multi-generational. So we have a lot of people living here for throughout their life. It's kind of got that Midwest feel. And there are younger generations that are moving, want to stay in the neighborhood and raise families. So how do we do that? Because we're all single family homes, and these homes now sell for anywhere from $650,000 to $1,600,000. So they're very expensive for young people, and they are too large for old people to age in. So we did want the missing middle housing, and we approached the city a year ago on how to do this. So this is what our neighborhood looks like. This is a duplex. We have duplexes on every corner already. Our neighborhood was developed in the 30s and 40s. During our general plan, it will be 100 years old. And very rarely you can see that on these duplexes, there are garages on the front. This community was built as a streetcar community back in the 30s and 40s. And therefore, owning a car was a unique event. And so we had single car garages that were in the back of our houses that now are really ideal for ADUs. Calling these granny flats, the ADUs were very well received when they were brought to us with the wisdom of the state, now allowing 2 of them in our backyards and 1 of them attached. But they were ideal for the conversion of these 1-car garages and excellent for elder people to age in place, and even for those 20 and 30-year-olds that are still living at home to have their own space out back. So we embraced ADUs. We've also embraced the idea of cluster homes or small lot houses because these allow for home ownership, which is really an identifying factor of our neighborhoods. We in the city, single family homes are owned about 50% owner occupied and 50% by investor. That's in 100 square miles of the city. But in our area, which is 1/10 of it and far more traditional, the majority of the homes are owned and occupied. And the small lot housing like this allows for people to still own homes and build equity. We're surrounded on 4 sides by small community centers. These neighborhood centers provide our local services, and they are simple, they are well maintained, and we believe that they have the opportunity to be upgraded and intensified with greater density, but only 2 stories over 1. So this is mixed use, 2 stories over one-story commercial. And we envision this change and want to drive and manage change in our community to this style for our community centers. Here's a repurposed building that was a commercial building, actually commercial industrial, that is now mixed use 2/1. So this is what we're looking for. So when the city came back to us, after we turned in our vision and our plans, they asked this question, housing strategy, should we permit a greater array of housing types in existing single-family neighborhoods? Well, we came back and said, yes, that's exactly what we asked for. And man, this is terrific because the city's listening to us. They've heard us. City-wide, and this was very similar to our own neighborhood surveys, about 40% strongly supported it. About a third strongly opposed it. And there was about a third that was undecided. Well, the key to the undecided was, and they wrote me letters. I'm chair of the land use committee for the area. And they said, it depends upon where you put these houses. So the city at the next step came forward with these two maps. On the left, they said they wanted to take the yellow areas, R1, and allow for small multifamily housing in these yellow areas. Again, they did not use the term they used the term within or in, not throughout the area. They then put this, they showed the small pink areas as neighborhood centers that needed to be intensified. So we said, great, we think they have the idea. Then they asked us, how big should we intensify those community centers? And they were talking about different FAR or height and mass on those buildings. So we thought we were doing pretty well. The city proposed then a strategy in writing that came out to open all R1. And at that point, we sensed that, was this intentional, that they were now making this clear? Or was it just an unintentional use of phrases and language that we misunderstood? But at that point, we've decided to say no to the R1 upzoning strategy. The alternative proposed strategy was to increase housing around our commercial nodes in residential neighborhoods and on our commercial corridors, or what are called transportation corridors. And then we also wanted to embrace the existing state strategy of ADUs, and we wanted to look forward towards the historic preservation of our well-defined community. So we asked questions like, what is the best way to protect and enhance our traditional neighborhoods? What are the key considerations for each? What kind of density, height, and setbacks will we find desirable? How do we encourage ownership versus developing a rental class? And how might these strategies help revitalize our small neighborhood commercial centers? We went back to our existing general plan. And this is so important. And I think both Maggie and Chris have brought up some of the issues here. And excuse me for repeating them, but our existing general plan states that a fundamental principle of infill development is that it needs to enhance the community character. And one of the ways it can enhance that is by being bicycle-friendly neighborhoods, increased housing diversity that ensure the integrity of historic districts and enhance retail viability. Now, these are not, sometimes these issues, these characteristics can be in conflict. It is the neighborhood and the community's right to self-determine the balance that we bring these into. So here is a neighborhood center, and it's surrounded by single-family lots, and it's of various heights and masses. What we're proposing is a very traditional use of this missing middle housing to provide transitions or buffers in the height and mass of the transportation corridors and the community centers. what in the plan for San Jose, California, they call neighborhood villages, and utilize missing middle housing, row housing, cluster housing, et cetera, as transitional to the single family lots. So we have proposed that this can be done in two ways. One is through neighborhood panels that actually mark and indicate the lots. And the second way is a very simple way to change land use designation by saying, if you have a lot that is adjacent to a commercial lot or a residential lot of higher density, then that lot can be opened to this missing middle housing. So it has to be adjacent to a commercial lot or a residential lot of higher, not equal, but higher density. If you say equal, it will allow for creep, somebody to divide by 5 lots and put up row houses for 5 lots. That there are places for, but not through entitlement. That would require a public meeting and review, a meeting with the design director. So this is called transition of scale and also design review. So those are our 2 guiding principles. The FAR, the last thing I want to talk about is the need to, if you are opening these specific lots to missing middle housing, you have to have good zoning limitations, and you have to get the transition of scale right, and you have to have limited height and mass. This is FAR, floor area ratio, and we are transitioning in Sacramento from density. Our single family neighborhoods are 2 to 8 units per acre, going up to 8 to 12 units per acre in these new lots, in these transitional lots. And the question is how tall and how massive. So this is the concept of FAR. Right now, single family homes are FAR 1. They take up, they're typically that second element there at the top, which is 2 stories on half a lot. That's very typical for single family homes. And you see FAR2 is very typical for our neighborhood community centers, 3 stories over 1 mixed use with parking out front or out back, as you can see in the middle. So these are the 2 areas. We would never want to go beyond FAR2 in our neighborhood corridors. That would be a large transportation corridor where we wanted to go for greater than 4 stories. You always want to set your FAR less than the height that you don't want to exceed. So this also in these center elements shows step downs. You can see at the top in the center, a building that is very tall and massive, but it's stepped down. This is another aspect of zoning ordinances where the commercial needs to step down in the structure of the building as it approaches an area of lower mass and density. I want to show you when this doesn't work. This is a development that's separating on the far right, a traditional neighborhood like ours. It's been separated by brand new cluster homes, small lot cluster homes, and row houses. You'll see in the small lot cluster homes that those are 2-story and they take up their entire lot. There's no setbacks or open space. So in this case, the lot coverage, which is normally limited to 50%, has been eradicated. And this is a new development. And so there is no lot limitations. There's FAR2, so they built 2-story homes taking up the entire lot. As you can see, the mass is greatly different from the traditional neighborhood next to it. On the left-hand side, you see row houses that are, again, FAR2, but because of their setbacks in the front, they're allowed to go a full 3 stories because they have that open space on the very front of the house. So that's an FAR2 that is 3 stories tall. In both of these cases, they dwarf the traditional neighborhood and eradicate the sense of open space. Last of all, these are design criteria and design standards. Maggie was right in that we do not have strong architectural design standards. We have design standards, but not that are applicable when you have ministerial review. Ministerial is just staff level review. We do have a review of buildings throughout Sacramento. Our town have had them for 20 years now that compare to design standards, but that has recently been seen as an unreasonable constraint to development by the state. So we recently have incorporated what's called staff or ministerial review, where only a checklist is needed. A design standard is not used. So this is the result of checklist. This is a really nice old preserved house on the right, a new house on the left. There is no, it's well designed, but not to any standards. It just met a checklist. And now you see in the back that they duplicated this building in the back. So now this small, nice house is being surrounded by this larger element. Finally, we have, this is the sort of end of the presentation. In new developments, this is a development with, again, with no open space at all. So these are FAR3 with no lot coverage, open space required. And this is affordable workforce housing. This has been a very successful development. It's selling out. It's selling out to young people. They hope to trade up and go. This is not a California lifestyle, but it is allowing them to build equity. We supported this development because it was ownership oriented and not rented. Last of all, I wanted to say that these are 58 strategies and policies that are moving to streamline housing production in Sacramento. Sacramento is trying to become the poster child of the state housing crisis by streamlining many different elements. You can see there's 5 different elements of long-range planning that they are going to change to solve a short-term crisis. Also, zoning and land use, 12 elements that they're going to policy or changes they're going to make to on a long-range basis, 50-year buildings to solve a short-term housing crisis. So you can see that this is, we're sort of battling on all fronts. Therefore, we need people like United Neighbors. We need people like Livable California to help us diagnose and analyzing what's happening on the state level that is taking away our rights of self-determination from our city, let alone trying to understand why the city is trying to dominate what used to be a community up planning process. So we're all in need, and thank you for your attention. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Kirk. If you'll go back to if you'll pull down your screen share. Thank you. So I'm going to summarize in like 5 or 6 words what I thought I heard you say, although I could be dead wrong, but it sounds like you were a very reasonable group of people in your neighborhood who were open to some density. You were working it out with the city. You thought they were on the same page, and they came back this year with wipeout of in their own vision of how it should happen, that it doesn't really listen to anything you guys were saying. At least that's what I picked up from your presentation.
They fundamentally doubled down on their own position. They're doing this out of principle. And I think the results they want is to be seen on the right side of equity, regardless of whether this happens or not. You know, we will be the people that don't make it happen, but they will be the people that advocated for it. So I don't think they can lose from this.
So if Kirk and Chris and Maggie would all unmute and just kind of talk back and forth about why is this happening? I understand that your mayor is a hardcore, high-end politician and all of that, but what is going on? What is going on in Sacramento? What's driving all of this?
Yeah, if I can finish the idea, I think it's our recent history. You know, the Black Lives Matter was a big movement here. We had a fatal shooting that was national here. all under this mayor. And he is taking a lot of heat. And our neighborhoods of color, which are the majority area probably of, or at least 50% of Sacramento, are underserved. And so they are comparing what are called amenities rich neighborhoods, the traditional neighborhoods that are mostly white, as amenity rich, and that's being defined by the state. So they get to take shelter that the state is saying we're amenity rich, and they're turning this on the head rather than the state saying, oh, you have communities of color that are underserved and you need to put better schools in there or better parks. Instead, they're placing the burden on the amenity rich neighborhoods and saying you need to open up. So it's a blame game, really. And but I think that they will end up doing the right thing. At the same time, they're running parallel paths. They are developing our underdeveloped communities. So
I'm going to have to get off. Sorry, Kurt. I want to just offer something else. We had a presentation from the staffers a while ago, and one of them described, somebody was talking about, okay, eliminating the parking and densification. And this guy said, oh, you know, it's not that big of a deal. My sister lives in a neighborhood where there's family has 6 cars. And then he said, you know, in San Francisco and in Manhattan, you know, you can't find parking, so people don't have cars. There is a component of this general plan that is about intense urbanization and trying to get rid of cars. That's why they're getting rid of the parking. So I don't think actually the equity thing, I mean, I don't think that's what's really underlying this, because I mean, really what Kirk is pointing out is that they're not doing anything about it. So I think there is this desire. You had the arena that went in, you know, they want the sports team. There is this desire on the part of Steinberg, and some of the folks are going around him, even with Aggie Square. Aggie Square is in the UC Davis Medical Center, which is the former state fairgrounds. It's a small area. Apparently Davis won't let the campus expand more, I guess. They want to add another 3,000 to 5,000 jobs in this very small area, which is surrounded by these historic neighborhoods. There is this push for density, for urbanization. When you have these planners talking about San Francisco and Manhattan, you know, I don't live in San Francisco for a reason. I don't want to live like that. And I think a lot of people don't. So I think that really is what's underscoring this more than, I think the equity thing is just slapped on the top. It's a way, I think it's about densification. The city does want more developer money. I understand there is an argument out there, which is sort of being looked at in terms of, is this going to, you know, up property taxes? Caltax did an article on it, and I know it's still, people are looking at that, but I think that's really what's going on. It's an intense push to make Sacramento, honest to God, Manhattan or San Francisco. And that's the thing that I think people really have to look at. And quite frankly, I think, and I hope that Kirk is right. I hope we're going to, you know, stop this, but it's a slippery slope. I mean, you could see in Midtown, you know, when they first raised the height limit of buildings, and now you've set a new precedent. So, okay, so this year you say you can do 6-unit apartments, and then it becomes 8-unit apartments, and then it becomes 12-unit apartments. And I really appreciated the visuals in your presentation, Kirk, and I asked you to send those to me. But I think there is that as well. And there's a vision for Sacramento that is maybe in Steinberg's mind, but I don't think it's in everybody else's mind, which is, I mean, I'd like to see this on the ballot, frankly. Anyway, I'll let Chris talk. I'm going to have to jump off in a minute here, but I really appreciate this opportunity. If this is recorded, I would really like to see it and also be able to see what I missed. And I want to thank Kurt and Chris again, and also Jill for putting this together.
Thank you, Maggie. I didn't really put it together, but thank you. Chris, can you weigh in on what Maggie was saying?
Sure. So I think that Kirk is being a little kind, honestly, as far as the city's motivations. To be frank, I think it's laziness, in the sense that there are amenity-rich neighborhoods and there are amenity-poor neighborhoods, and those neighborhoods that are currently lagging, those amenities didn't just mysteriously appear. That's the first thing. Neighborhood residents advocated for them and in often cases paid for them. An example of that would be the neighbors on my street asked for additional lighting because it's pretty dark at night over here, and there's palm trees and bushes kind of to block off frontage streets. The issue with that is that if someone was walking their dog or a kid got out, they could get hit because it's dark. So we asked for additional lighting, and the city essentially came to us and said, "Oh, well, we could do this, this, and this, but it'll be $300,000 that will add on to your property taxes." So that's just an example in the sense that amenity-rich neighborhoods don't become amenity-rich just by osmosis. Those amenities don't just pop out of the ground fully formed. Um, and it will take a significant amount of financial and investment and just investment in time and attention to amenity poor neighborhoods to bring them up to par. So this proposal in increasing the density and essentially scapegoating the amenity rich neighborhoods as destination neighborhoods where everybody wants to live doesn't it essentially lets Steinberg and the rest of the city council off the hook when it comes to improving the existing neighborhoods that have been left behind, whether that be by coincidence or design. So that's one thing I just wanted to call out there. And then second of all, I wanted to reiterate the point that I made before, that in the sense that I agree with Maggie in the sense I don't want to live in San Francisco. I mean, there's a lot of things wrong with San Francisco. A lot of people don't want to live in San Francisco. That's why they're all leaving. And that's aside from the core reason of affordability. But there's a whole host of quality of life metrics that aren't being met for people who live in San Francisco, and that's why they're leaving. The issue is that people who own anything in San Francisco, even if it's just a garage and a parking space, if you sell that, you now have money to buy something pretty much anywhere else, and they are able to flee and buy up our housing stock. But the issue is that if our quality of life starts to go down due to increased density, which could lead to a whole host of issues like reduced parking, increased issues with infrastructure, power and water, increased crime, just because as you increase density, crime tends to go up. Our upper middle class people will leave, and we'll be left with essentially Baltimore, except in California, and that's no good.
What do they say back to you when you, Chris, when you make these arguments? What are the city officials saying back to you about that?
Well, the main thing that I've heard is that, specifically from Jay Chenier, my councilman, I know I put it in the chat because some people thought it was Eric Garrett. He's running for state senate, but he leans pretty heavily on the idea that it's the right thing to do, and that they really believe that it's gonna, or at least they're really saying that it's gonna address the affordability crisis. And I really think that the racial equity argument is kind of to use like an idiom, I guess, a spoonful of sugar to make the rest of the medicine go down, even though this medicine probably hasn't passed its FDA trial or anything like that, if we want to follow that analogy to the end.
And Chris,
Yes.
are they able to give any examples? Because as far as we know, there are no examples of upzoning creating affordability. It doesn't exist anywhere in the country. And of course, Vancouver in British Columbia is the poster child for how it backfires. But why do they believe it when they can't bring out any examples?
That's a good question. So we're going to get a little philosophical to answer it. So to answer the first part of that, you're right, in the sense that I haven't seen and I haven't heard any of the city council bring up any evidence in support of their assertions. As for why they feel so strongly about this, even though they don't have the evidence to back it up, I would make the argument that they believe themselves in their political position to be what I'll call enlightened, and they have to educate and enlighten the rest of us. And by proposing a solution that puts the control in their hands, then it allows them to take a central role in the process of fixing it. In addition to the fact that developer money and all those other things. So So there's a whole host of reasons why they are pushing this and why I believe that a fundamental reasoning behind their mindset is that they know what's best for us, even though I personally believe that an economy is a amalgamation of millions of decisions that get made every day, and it's too complicated for any small group of people to manage on their own.
Jill, I have an input on that.
Please.
Yeah, I have a different council person. Mine is Katie Valenzuela. She's newly elected, and she is a housing advocate and a progressive housing advocate, a woman of color, and a downtown city renter she's very proud of being a renter. And she does feel that there is some bias against renters. Yet what we're talking about is a bias towards ownership and equity as financial security for our citizens. And that we don't want a renter class of people because the economy has not left other alternatives for wealth building unless you're involved, in a tech startup. So otherwise it's by owning a home, and that's where your stability comes from. So she, when we did challenge affordability, she has agreed that this motion for residential upzoning, that quadplexes will not provide affordability, but without capital A subsidies. In other words, there needs to be a voucher program to go along with this. Her now current argument is that she needs the housing supply of all kinds in order to put vouchers or subsidies into. And they feel that there's going to be significant contributions from this federal government back for affordability housing subsidies, and that all they need to do is build, and then they will subsidize the rentals. So that's what she's saying. And she's going to put in housing ordinance laws for requiring the acceptance of vouchers as possibly a condition for building these new buildings, and there's some talk on the state level that ADUs will be required in the future to accept vouchers or to be priced at some level into below mean average income or the market rate, which takes us to the state. And we're very concerned about the state in SB 9 and 10 taking over, usurping the city's zoning ordinance capabilities, because the big deal is the city council is telling us, accept the upzoning and we will protect what the buildings look like and your community character through zoning restrictions. But the city will see that as a restraint on development. The state will, and they will penalize the city for that. And so that's why the city is moving towards ministerial review and taking away these powers of zoning determination.
Yeah, let me just jump back in there real fast.
Yeah, please, Chris.
So I disagree like pretty thoroughly with Katie Valenzuela's idea of what housing policy should look like. Ultimately, I mean, if we really want to boil this down to like, the fundamentals, what we're looking at is essentially Reaganomics, except in the housing market. And I think that if we were to ask Katie herself, well, hey, what do you think about Reaganomics? She would go into a fit saying how it's the worst thing that ever happened to this country. So we can't say Reaganomics is bad and trickle down theory is bad, but also it's good except like when it's housing. That doesn't really work. And beyond that, we have a series of housing policies that Katie and people like her advocate for that lead to reduced amounts of building, in the sense of rent control and the requirement that, at least sounds like she wants to say we require that we would take vouchers. I don't think it's necessarily the state or the city or the county's business whether or not a landlord chooses to accept Section 8 vouchers or not. And honestly, like saying that she needs the housing to then authorize the vouchers doesn't really make sense. It really should be the other way around. You should need the vouchers, which would then enable people to afford the housing, which would then drive the construction of more housing. You don't build the housing and just hope people show up to live in it. That's how China ends up with cities that they've built where nobody lives. Like,
Correct.
you gotta have the demand first, and then you supply. You don't just generate supply hoping that people show up to live there.
Thank you. I'm going to interrupt you both for just a moment here to say that Rick is going to start taking questions from the crowd. We have about 140 people on the call.